Everyone says how horrible it will be to renovate or build your house. We're here to say it doesn't have to be that way. Join 3 seasoned architects as they interview homeowners who recently completed a large project and ask them one simple question. What do you know now that you wish you knew before you started? Welcome to Home, the Second Story podcast.
Hi, and welcome to a snack-sized episode of Home, the Second Story. I'm Sherry from Springhouse Architects.
I'm Marilyn from Runcible Studios.
And I'm Taylor from TPD Architect.
Today, we are going to discuss multi-generational homes. And it is a hot topic in my office. We get calls all the time now about families that are not even necessarily going to do a project in the next year, but they want to talk about how it might work and how it might work for their family and how the structure could support that. What are you guys seeing?
Same.
We don't see it like necessarily called multi-generational housing. Around here, we call them in-law suites.
Yes.
and that's really the way it gets phrased. We can't do ADUs here in Birmingham. So
accessible dwelling unit.
Accessible dwelling units.
Accessory.
Thank you. I knew something didn't sound right.
Accessory dwelling unit.
But with Taylor, it would be accessible.
Accessible and accessory.
Yes. It would be so accessible and it would be so lovely, but I am precluded from doing so in my current locale. But we do talk a lot about in-law suites. And that's really the way, if folks are listening from Birmingham, multi-generational is not foreign to us. We just call it something else.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if people are calling it necessarily that, but just the concept, in the Boston area and in Lancaster, like our 2 areas where we work, I have active multi-generational houses going on right now. And one is an in-law suite addition, and a couple of them in Boston are ones where there's provision for multi-generations to live together. So I think this is partially in the Boston area about real estate prices.
Right.
Mom and dad might own a home kind of outright. They paid nothing for it 30 years ago. It's now worth $2 million because real estate is crazy. And the kids who are in their 30s, who now have their own kids, can't necessarily afford a house that's big enough. So we are doing these renovations of mom and dad's larger home to turn it into a house for 3 generations to live together. So that's often the story. It's often driven by real estate costs in the Boston area. We are allowed to do accessory dwelling units.
Jinx.
Although in certain jurisdictions in Massachusetts, ADU stands for affordable dwelling unit.
Oh.
So we also call them backyard cottages.
Really
which is like a whole other thing with zoning. So whatever. But the point is that the zoning in Massachusetts is per town, per city, whatever. But a lot of towns and cities are making them not only just legal, but really pushing them as a way to help the housing crisis, which is pretty acute in Massachusetts. And then in Pennsylvania, where things are a little bit less, in rural Pennsylvania, where my other side of the practice is, it's less about real estate costs and just more about the practicality of having mom and dad move in instead of going to an assisted living facility or whatever. It's actually cheaper and more desirable for the family to have mom and dad staying closer to home rather than moving into a different facility or something like that. So that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, in Ohio, it is more of the care part of it, wanting to let their parents age in place a little bit longer. And with new construction, we are designing houses that have 2 different sides and kind of come together in the middle in some way. We have done in-law suites. We've done every variation of in-law suite. Sometimes they're just bigger guest rooms type thing. Yep. And other times they have little living spaces and a small countertop and coffee maker, things like that. But typically in those situations, they share the facilities like the laundry and the kitchen and things like that. They really are living together. Some of our favorite projects are when we're really kind of designing 2 separate full living spaces and then designing the space where the two sides can come together. And it's an exercise kind of in privacy and timing, like who gets to close the door, who,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
decides when they're going to come together. If one of them has guests or the other does, how does that react to each side of the house? And of course, the size, who who gets the bigger size, who's bringing the most money. There are just so many topics that we get into in through the design.
I could be making like a big gesture and motion to pull out my giant soapbox to talk about aging in place, because as y'all know,
Let's go.
it's my passion, and we sort of turned it into some thoughts about and some design work for senior living communities. But I think there's a couple of things that I think might be helpful for listeners to kind of think about. There are a couple of things going on in housing markets all over the country, and it's been well noted in articles in the Journal and in the Times, is that we have a generation of people for whom their houses are not appropriate. And it could be that they aren't designed for them to age in place. It could be that they can't support the kinds of physical things that people need, whether it's too many steps, whether it's a kitchen that doesn't work. But it could also be that it's just too big. And so there are a lot of folks who are living in houses that are way too big for what they actually use and want to maintain. And we don't have houses for them to move into. So we don't have smaller homes that are accessible and places for them to go. And in effect, what that's done, especially around here, is lock up the housing market in a lot of ways. So we have folks who are staying in their homes who are older, who don't want to be there, but there's no place for them to go. And we need so much in the way of older adult housing options. So whether that's senior living, independent living, continuing care communities, retirement homes, you name it, or it's aging in place appropriate homes, there's not enough of that to sort of unlock that market. So one of the ways that we can address that, again, standing on my giant soapbox, is to think about, are there ways where we can take homes and create space so that care can be given in a home that's appropriate? And multi-generational homes are one way to sort of think about that. ADUs are another way to think about that. Carriage houses, in-law suites, all of those things are important to think about. There are some limitations, and where people want to live and where they want to spend their time, whether or not they are close to their existing doctors and their communities and their restaurants and their activities. All of those are really important questions to ask. But I think that multi-generational homes are one of many solutions to kind of address this very critical problem we have of an aging population, and we just don't have enough places for them to live. So I think this is a hugely important topic for our practice, but I think for the country as a whole to kind of be thinking about how are we as an aging population going to kind of rectify that situation, because there is a mismatch out there right now, and it's big.
I think one place to look for inspiration for how this has been handled in the past is older homes, actually. So in the Boston area, we're famous for having triple deckers. So they're basically 3 apartments stacked up. They're like a box. And traditionally, they were built by a family, and like mom and dad would live on one floor, aunt and uncle would live
Right.
on the other floor, and they might rent out the other floor, or maybe another aunt and uncle's living on the other floor, and the kids are kind of all between. And it was the original, immigrant families come over and everyone's living together, and you move into the neighborhood and you buy one of these or you build one of these triple deckers, and you are having 3 separate apartments that are in pretty close quarters. There's not much of a yard and that kind of thing. I think looking at historic precedents is actually pretty interesting, because historically people aged at home, people raised kids at home. So what do actually our historic buildings teach us about how we can live together? And obviously there is, a triple decker, for example, has a lot of stairs. So that's not ideal. And like our understanding about, mobility and that kind of thing.
Well, people are living longer.
People are living way longer. But I also want to point out that multi-generational living is also about kids. And you have to have a space that works really well for raising kids, which is sometimes really different than what you want for someone who's in their retirement years, right? So how does the yard factor in? How does caring for pets and dogs and like all that kind of stuff, the activities that kids have, the kids want to have sleepovers and, you know, birthday parties and all these kinds of things that might be in direct, you know, tension with a quiet going to bed early sort of life that might be a little bit more on the side of grandma and grandpa. So, you know, Sherry, you brought up the word privacy, and I think that that's really key. When you're understanding a potential multi-generational home, you have to understand, what does day-to-day living look like? Not just the perfect, oh, on Friday night, everyone comes over for dinner and all I do is walk through this door and I'm at your house. Like, also, all you do is walk through that door and you're in my house.
Right.
So
Exactly.
how does that work? How does the privacy? And those are complicated conversations. So I'm curious to hear you guys, like, how are those conversations, like when you're meeting with a client and there's 3 generations at the table, how do those conversations go? How do you help people balance that?
And it is hard when they're all at the same table, right? It's almost like,
Yes.
can we schedule separate? Because I really want to hear what they really want to say, right? Especially
Yeah.
if it's the wife's parents, like let's talk about this privately.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and sometimes it's different story and sometimes it's not. Honestly, the families that we've worked with, they want to live together and they want to come together and just to support each other. And you're right, Marilyn, it is 3 generations. It's not just 2. A lot of times we are designing, if you call it an in-law suite in the home for parents that may or may not move back. But another real conversation is when our kids move back, because they're not
Yep.
ready or able at 22 years old when they graduate from college. They're probably coming back and they're different people.
Yep.
If you can accommodate for them to have their own different space, that makes a much more pleasant experience, I would assume, thinking my kids are in their 20s and they have not come back yet, knock on wood, but
Knock,
just
knocking
never know.
everywhere.
Just never know. You never know what's going to happen. And things are unstable. And so, yeah, planning for that in architecture and in your home is a smart thing to do. The other thing, Marilyn, you were talking about privacy. The other big thing that we talk about is independence.
Yes.
So, especially for the parents having, when we're building ground up, we always try to give the parents their own garage. I don't know why, but that's kind of a touch point for them. Like, I want to come and go and not have everybody know I'm coming and going and sharing space and storage and all of those things. So the independence of them and the independence of them having guests come over that can come directly into their space.
I think one of the things that comes out from this conversation that I think it's important for our listeners is this is not an easy one size fits all, here are the rules, this is the way you do it kind of thing. This is something that is emotional. It has to do with money. It has to do with family dynamics. It has to do with planning and it might have to do with estates. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that kind of comes into it. So I think the advice I would have for our listeners is don't shy away from having these hard conversations. You're going to have to engage in them. You're about to spend a lot of money to do whatever project it is. You need to be thinking about all of these things. And like I said, there's no rules. There's no right or wrong. It depends on your family and the way you operate, when everybody goes to bed, what type of television they watch, who exercises when. And all of those things are really important to kind of flesh out in those early planning processes.
By the way, those conversations don't have to happen just on your own.
No.
As architects, I think we joke in the industry that when you work on custom homes, we actually have like a side expertise in marriage and family counseling because we are brought into people's dynamics And suddenly a simple question that we ask, like, what does Thanksgiving dinner look like? And all of a sudden there's a bunch of looks around the table and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, what did I just ask?
Yeah.
So we have training, we have desire to help people through these processes. And we've been through it many, many times. So I think for families who are like, how do I even embark on these conversations? Something that can be helpful is having another person who is not in your family who is asking these questions and picking up on family dynamics and walking people through how to have these conversations around using space and that project as the sort of catalyst and as the excuse for talking about it. We can say, we're not trying to change the traditions of Thanksgiving dinner. I'm just asking, how many people usually come over? You know,
Right.
like, how does that play out? What does that day look like for different people? So that can be a way to enter into the conversation. So you don't have to feel like you have it all figured out and you show up to the architect and you're like, here's what we want to do. We are actively, very active in helping people through those conversations.
And I'll add to that, it might be helpful to think too about how this design by committee is going to arrive at decisions. And
Yes.
who's going to have the decision-making authority or communicating authority. It is very hard to design by committee, as anybody who has ever worked on a church project or worked with a board will understand. So if amongst the family members that are going to be involved in that project, if there's some like guidelines that you guys can put together and sort of say, okay, and this may be with the help of your architect too, we need to sort of figure out how we're going to communicate and make decisions, because that process can be very helpful. And what you don't want is, you know, midway through the project, somebody's like, well, I didn't like that. I don't know why we're doing that. You want those decisions to have been made and executed in a way that everybody is on the same page with.
Yeah. And please don't everyone email me all the time,
No.
right? Like one point
No,
of contact. So that then I'm in and moving in that direction. And then I don't hear from mom who says, you know, this other thing. And then dad who emails me later and I don't know what to do. One point of contact, please.
So clearly, we all have the same issues coming in all different parts of the country, which I find interesting. Not only with in-law suites, which used to what we traditionally called it, but now multi-generational homes, which oftentimes includes 3 generations, and who knows where it will go from there. So it's kind of interesting, the conversation, how it's going back a little bit to more traditional family dynamics. And that kind of goes along with walkable cities and things like that people are moving back into, which I think is great for our profession. And I think architecture can help all of that.
I
For
agree.
humanity.
Thanks for joining us today on Home, the Second Story for a quick snack. Questions for us, topics you'd like us to cover, or interested in being a guest? Reach out at admin@htssspodcast.com. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Home, the Second Story podcast. Feel free to share this episode with a friend. Contact information for all 3 of our architects are in our show notes. And don't miss future episodes. Follow or subscribe to our show for free in Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now.